And as always, we'll talk about a variety of things on the programme. And first of all, we're talking about the environmental group Extinction Rebellion, who you'll have noticed earlier this year when they shut down parts of London during 10 days of protest. But what do you know about them? Well, they describe themselves as an international movement that uses non-violent civil disobedience to bring issues such as climate change to the fore. Started in the UK last year after the report on global warming by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was issued, part of the United Nations. But what else do we know about them? Are they making a difference? What do you think of their methods, radical ones? Do you agree with that or not? And would we be talking about them if they hadn't blocked off bits of London? So here's your chance to hear from the group's spokesperson, climate activist Rupert ahead of him presenting a free lecture in Brighton this evening. I spoke to him earlier.
Well, I think we don't have to guess about this. The opinion polls have been pretty clear about it. Opinion is divided about whether we are using the right methods, but opinion is quite strongly in our favour in terms of what we're aiming for, the very, very ambitious and necessary goals that we are aiming for of making Britain net zero carbon and stopping biodiversity loss absolutely as soon as humanly possible, which we're convinced is within the next decade. So we don't really mind whether people like us or not. What we care about is whether or not we're changing public consciousness and starting to change public policy. And that is absolutely happening, which is very exciting.
Okay, I want to talk about more of those sort of details in a moment, but just the name itself, Extinction Rebellion, do you think because of it sounds quite dramatic, maybe a little bit aggressive as a name, do you think that might put some people off who actually would be quite sympathetic to your cause?
Yep, absolutely. I think it might at first. But what we're here to do is to disrupt normal assumptions. What we find is that sometimes at first when people hear about us or see our actions, there's an initial reaction of, oh gosh, is that really necessary? And then they listen to what we're saying and to what the climate scientists are saying, to what David Attenborough is saying, to what Greta Thunberg is saying. And then they think something like, you know what, these folks have a point. And the name Extinction Rebellion, what it means is that we are in rebellion. We're not just protesters. We're in rebellion against the government, because how can a government be legitimate, which is putting us on the path to collapsing our civilization and possibly making us extinct in the longer term, and certainly making many, many other species of our fellow animals and plants extinct. The situation is a dramatic one. It warrants a dramatic response.
But it's not just the government, it's us as consumers, as we go about our lives every day in the kind of parameters that we're set up. Like, for instance, if we have a car, that is the thing we've been given to get us either to work every day or to go and visit relatives or do things at the weekends. So we are part of the problem. It's not just the government, is it?
Well, but I think the key phrase there is the phrase you used, within the parameters we've been set. Of course, individuals have a responsibility, but there's only so much that individuals can do unless government and business and so forth set the right parameters. So that's why our primary focus is not on guilt or anything like that. Our primary focus is on targeting the government and saying there has to be massive change and it has to be led from the top. And the encouraging thing, as I say, is that this is now just about starting slowly and painfully to happen. Today there is going to be a massive lobby of Parliament to lobby for a carbon net zero target to be realised in 2050 and to be brought forward much sooner than that. And that's happening because of Extinction Rebellion. It would not be happening otherwise. The government has now legislated for carbon net zero in 2050, but we are saying, no, that has to be brought forward drastically. 2050 is far, far too late. This is an emergency. And in an emergency, you don't say, well, in a couple of decades' time, we'll really take this seriously. You take it seriously right now.
I think Greta Thunberg was saying when she was in the country that 2025 should be that target. That is, would you agree that that is unrealistic, or is that achievable, this net carbon neutral?
So Greta Thunberg and I are singing off absolutely the same song sheet here. I asked her this question when she was in England in April, and she said she is in full support of Extinction Rebellion, including Extinction Rebellion's aims, which are, as you say, for net zero by carbon 2025. It is an incredibly ambitious target, but you know what? It's the absolute least we can do if we're going to be serious in our responsibility to our children. Because if we don't aim for the absolute maximum possible, if we don't try to have the equivalent of a wartime mobilization, then we are bequeathing to our children and to our grandchildren, if any, a devastated future. And the science is becoming clearer and clearer on that. Tragically, the weather on this planet is already starting to spin out of control. That is a result of human action. There's no longer any question about that. And if we don't take absolute full responsibility for it, and if we don't do everything we can on it, then we will regret that for the rest of our lives.
Okay.
There is one thing that could be equally as bad as destroying our civilization, and that would be not having done everything to try to stop that destruction.
So for instance, within 6 years, how will our lives as we know them today have changed? How will our behaviours and the way we consume things need to change to achieve that, do you think?
So if we're going to achieve that goal, then among the things that we're going to have to do is stop airport expansion, stop the building of new roads, stop fracking, stop coal mining, start a massive expansion of public transport, start taking cycling and walking much more seriously, start living more locally and relocalizing. I think there's a massive win-win here because many people actually want to have more strong, flourishing local communities. They don't want to be rushing around all over the place on hugely long commutes and hardly seeing their families and hardly knowing their neighbors. But the details, of what this is going to look like, our idea is for those to be sorted out by a citizens' assembly. And what that means is that we say that Parliament has failed, the government has failed to take sufficient leadership on this, and they should outsource some of the responsibility to a group of citizens selected from the community in the way that juries are selected, i.e. randomly, although it should be a representative cross-section. Those people should be given all the information they need, given expert advice, and they should deliberate on our behalf about how to put together a plan for how we're going to do this. And again, the encouraging thing is that because of Extinction Rebellion's dramatic success in April, and because of the massive support we've garnered, the government is now starting to do this. They're saying we are going to set up such a citizens' assembly. Now, the problem is that, as I said before, it's only going to aim for carbon net zero in 2050, which is not soon enough, and it's only going to be advisory rather than having real power. But that's why Extinction Rebellion is going to be back out on the streets this autumn to try to get the government to go further, and that's what I'm going to be talking about this evening, mobilizing people towards that autumn uprising.
Right, okay, and well, you're not going to sit here this morning and tell me exactly what you've got planned and when and where, but that direct action, that peaceful direct action, and okay, maybe that disrupts some people's days as well. You accept that they're not going to be happy about that?
Absolutely, but as I say, what the evidence suggests is that most people come round to it over time. For example, in April, we held Waterloo Bridge for nearly 2 weeks, and at first some people were annoyed, but after a little while, the taxi drivers and the cyclists and the commuters who started walking over the bridge, and actually the bridge became a beautiful and pleasant place, more and more people were coming over to our side. People understand that a tiny bit of disruption now is a small price to pay to avoid the kind of horrendous disruption to our lives that unchecked climate breakdown is going to bring. And so, yeah, we'll be back on the streets in the autumn. We will be taking more nonviolent direct action. We will be targeting that primarily at government, but there will be also some inconvenience to passers-by, etc. And I think what you will see is a further huge swelling of support for us, an upswelling of support for our aims, and we're going to further transform consciousness in this country. And that is the slim hope that we now have, that we may be able, as a country and as a species, to give ourselves a future.
Yeah, and you mentioned governments then, and you said small hope. I mean, say the UK government got on board with you and did exactly what you said, then that's going to scratch the surface if some of the biggest polluters on the planet, some of the biggest countries, don't change their way as well. So what chance of that?
Well, first, just to say that Britain has an outsized responsibility here. We have a historical responsibility because we've been burning fossil fuels longer than anyone else. We're also responsible for a huge amount of the finance for destructive fossil fuels around the world through the City of London, and we need to stop doing that and take responsibility for the destructive effects of that.
But they won't give up that easily, will they?
Well, no, that's going to be a huge struggle, and we're likely to be targeting also huge, rich, vested interest in the City of London in the Autumn Rebellion. But to come to the other part of your question, yes, it's true that Britain alone acting on this, even to the max, is not going to be enough. And here's what's really exciting, that Britain has a leadership position on this now. I mean, from the point of view of the rebellion. Climate activists and people all over the world are now watching Britain, watching our example. I'm in touch, for example, with Extinction Rebellion activists in the United States, and they're watching what we achieve, and they're trying to copy it. So imagine that. Imagine if we have further success this autumn in moving Britain towards a viable ecological future.
But America's leader doesn't sound like he's willing to change his mind on the environment or climate change.
Absolutely, and that's why he'll probably go at the next presidential election. That's one of the reasons why he'll be thrown out.
Sure about that?
I'm not sure about it.
He seems very confident he's going to stay.
It certainly needs to happen. I think it's certainly more likely to happen if we have this climate uprising and if we have the kind of strong discourse that we do have now around the dire need for something like a Green New Deal. So with British leadership in terms of protest and rebellion, we could start to see large parts of the world moving in the same direction. That is a hugely exciting prospect. That is a hugely exciting thought for the future of humanity.
And China's move to open more and more coal-fired power stations, are they going to pay attention to what we're doing?
I think they will pay attention to what we're doing, because one thing that countries like China and India endlessly say is, how can you expect us to choose a different development path and restrain our emissions while you don't, because you have been emitting for far longer? So when Britain and the US take true leadership on this, and that's the situation that we in Extinction Rebellion are trying to move us into, then China are far more likely to step up to the plate fully, as in some ways they have already started doing. Remember that they have a much, much better record, for example, on renewable energy than we do.
And a final question for you, Rupert Reed. If you could see a different way to crack this nut, to change the damage that's being caused to the planet, would you take it, or do you think this is the only way to do it?
Yep, if I could see a different way, I would take it without a heartbeat, because this is a very difficult way. We had 1,100 people arrested in April. Not one of those people wants to spend time in cells, let alone in prison, if they can avoid it. The trouble is we've tried everything else, right, and we're out of time. And I think the British people understand that. And that's why the opinion polls suggest that the British people have swung right behind our radical aims, and it's now the government which is behind the curve. And so at the talk this evening, I'm going to be talking about that and how we can have even more people on the streets taking nonviolent direct action this autumn and being part of giving ourselves the future that we need.
It's the Brighthelm Centre, North Road in Brighton, from 6:30 this evening. And what should we expect if we turn up?
Well, you should expect a very large crowd. It is in principle sold out, but there is an overflow room. So I'd urge people, if you're excited by what I've been saying here this morning, I'd urge people to come along, and you'll be able to hear the live video link, and you will be able to ask questions. It should be a really buzzing event. There's going to be hundreds of us there.
Dr. Rupert Reed speaking to me earlier, his talk tonight at the Brighthelm Centre in Brighton from 6:30.